and which was a collaboration with her neighbours on those roads. My name is Alastair Owens. I'm an academic from Queen Mary University of London. I'm here really just to sort of chair things. I'm also a Hackney resident, so I've been here 30 years, though not on those roads. So I'm going to try and keep order, and these guys have got lots of different things to say. They're all going to introduce themselves in a moment, but I'm just going to introduce Eithne to start us off. So I've known Eithne for quite a long time because Eithne was a colleague of mine at Queen Mary, where she worked on a project about people's experiences of being at home during the pandemic called Stay Home Stories, which we're still busy writing about at the current time. But Eithne is somebody who's been in Hackney for 48 years, I think you were telling me earlier on. And she's a bit of a polymath, is Eithne. She's a photographer, she's a writer, she's a filmmaker, and she collaborates with filmmakers. An academic, she recently published a really wonderful book called Child Migrant Stories in Modern Britain, which came out last year with Bloomsbury. And associated with that, there's a website and a whole set of resources about young people's experiences of migrating to the UK. And I do recommend, if you haven't seen that, to look at that website and to watch some of those films. But the current project goes back 5 years, and this sort of brings together Eithne's talents at both writing and photography. And we're going to think back to what was a very similar time. You know, the weather was warm, wasn't it? We had this long period of warm weather in the spring of 2020. So the conditions feel very similar, and we're going to take ourselves back to that moment. So I'm going to hand over to Eithne now, and maybe the other members of the panel to introduce themselves too.
Okay, well, great. Thank you for coming. And it's always been a collaboration with my neighbours, and actually, so saying, Lawrence is reminding me that I had actually done 2 similar photography projects. I can't remember, one 1990 and one about 5 years ago, but I thought the pandemic was just an ideal time to do this project because we were all at home, and it was great to find something to do during the pandemic, and it was a moment to capture. Historically, it felt like a moment to capture. So it's been great to have my neighbours, so maybe you could introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Lawrence, and I live on one end of Mehetabel Rd, and yeah, I suppose significance for me, something we'll talk about later, was me having a small business during started before lockdown and then changed in the process of the whole COVID situation. It's quite interesting.
I'm Selena, I live at number 35 Mehetabel Road.
I'm Louis, I live at number 6. I think the significant thing for my family was trying to manage the needs of 2 very differently aged children, and just seeing what sort of impact that had, being at 2 very different stages.
Great. Well, then I'm the only representative of Isabella Road, aren't I? So there's Isabella Road and Mehetabel Road, which you all know is just around the corner from here and leads down the apex into Suggestion Pub at the corner, which you can't see on this. So Isabella Road and Mehetabel Road, the houses are mainly, they start from about the 1870s, and Isabella and Mehetabel were the daughters of the landowners, we think.
That's what we think.
We think. So that's why it's called Isabella and Mehetabel. And so to do the book, well, first of all, I started to do the portraits, but it was also good to create some of the art that was happening during lockdown. So the book cover is Jenny, who was sheltering, but who's an artist, and she was doing artwork of her memory during lockdown. So this is called 200 metres to the shops. So even though she wasn't going to the shops, then she was painting what she was from memory. And then also this is Bluebell, who no longer lives in the street, but who was a great artist, who drew this wonderful picture of the COVID attacking her house with rainbows and stuff. So it's very sweet. So the actual book, this is Lawrence, he'll talk about this, but the actual book also had text this time. So the previous books just had images, portraits. So it had it had something about people wrote questionnaires, or I actually took some oral histories from people, and it looks at what people look forward to when it was over, and the significance of the objects. And I wanted to do something different this time, so I didn't know whether it was going to work, whether people would be up for it, actually holding objects on the doorstep, because as we see later, it was a bit of an odd thing to ask people to do. But people actually started to engage with it. Lawrence, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so that's me with my hair a little less grayer. And we're all, as Eithne said, we're all holding objects that were, well, the idea was that they were important to us at the time, or they sort of saw us through, or helped to see us through the whole process. And so you can see my wife is holding a sewing machine which she bought during lockdown, and then did some sewing with our younger daughter there. And I think is that in Hackney Museum? That was,
Yes, it
yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah, it ended up in the COVID exhibition at Hackney Museum, the stitched together fabric.
Come around the front.
And then we have the very ever important cat at the back, being held by our eldest daughter. And I'm holding a loaf of bread, which I'll come on to in a minute. But yeah, it's interesting what ended up being important to get through those times. What kind of games became important. I mean, it's funny, we were talking about it earlier, and it's like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten that. Oh yeah, when was that? And it's this strange kind of blur in a way. And I do think this whole process of what happened during COVID is almost like something we've all forgotten in some way, because maybe we had to in order to, maybe we still can't make sense of it. So, and I can't remember what we did. I mean, we just,
Well, you were busy. You talked about the bread business.
Yeah. So yeah, we were really busy because both our daughters were in school, and my wife and I were both continuing to work. I was dividing my time between teaching online and baking, and it just so happened that I had this small bread business that I decided to move to the back garden, and the shed, as it's become known. A bit more than a shed, but it was, I literally, not just saying literally, but it was literally finished the night before London lockdown. I got in there and I baked, because I think it was a Wednesday, or was it a Thursday, London lockdown. I was baking in there on a Thursday, and during the 2 weeks of beginning of lockdown, I do a subscription thing, my orders doubled, and there was no way I could cope in the house. So it just so happened to be finished in time for me to be able to cope with that impact. So yeah, we were really busy. We weren't learning Italian and reading War and Peace.
And we were very grateful for the bread, I can say.
Yeah.
Everybody in the street that were already part of your...
Yeah.
But you doubled your orders, didn't you?
That's right. And in fact, I used to do all the deliveries myself. Because they doubled, I couldn't cope. And my neighbour, Ziad, stepped in. He wasn't working at the time. He said, oh, I'm free, do you want me to do the deliveries? So he ended up doing them, and Gina helped him out a few times as well, a younger child. So
on a lovely little cart.
yeah, cargo bike, yeah. So it was a real kind of community effort. Yeah, is that enough? Anything else?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought the book we opened with this quote from Damien. There was something odd about sitting on the steps of our house on a sunny day, displaying objects that somehow represented my coronavirus experience. We're just 10 minutes away from Homerton Hospital, where hundreds, maybe thousands, have been treated in intensive care on the edge of life, and I was holding a toothbrush and hair clippers. And I mean, I kind of thought, oh God, am I being too, is this too sort of flippant? Yeah, but it wasn't. It didn't work like that. I thought the seriousness of what was happening in the street. There was actually a nurse who was working in intensive care, and I just wanted to read out his little statement. I spent my night breaks in tears while patients nearby were gasping for air. My colleagues, young nurses and support staff from around the world held fear in their eyes. But although we lost battles, we tackled what was in front of us and did our best. I thought I was up for it. I exercised daily, ate well and slept. My family was filled with love and admiration for what I was doing. But I took a kicking, became coiled and unbalanced. But I'm back, uncoiled and rebalanced. If we get a second peak, I know I'll return. There's no place I'd rather be than on the front line doing my job. And this is, but he didn't want to be in the photograph. He doesn't live on the street anymore. But this was a COVID nurse doll that was knitted by his sister to keep him going. So the significance of Oscar. Oh, and Damien actually was he was holding a toothbrush because he couldn't get dentists at that time, or he couldn't, and so he had to get antiseptic toothpaste. And of course, we all know why.
So I didn't get them mixed up.
All right, Selina, I'm going to pass over to you because I know this is Joyce, your neighbour, and also you're going to read out something about Joyce.
Yes, I am. So I've lived next door to Joyce for 27 years. 28 years. Anyway, this is what she thought of COVID. We came here in 1941 during the war. I was evacuated, of course, but Mum was here. You weren't cooped up then, even if it was dangerous. For 9 weeks, I've not been further than my doorstep. I keep threatening to, but Selina next door tells me I mustn't. You did. No, Joyce, you have to say no. I'm one of the elderly. I have a heart problem too, and diabetes, but I don't take that as being ill. You could feel written off during this pandemic. That's the sad thing about care homes. We're not treated that portion of people right. We've not treated that portion of people right. People on the front line have suffered too. I watched a programme on television about 2 big British firms offering all this equipment, safety, masks, gowns to the government. They've not even had an acknowledgement. I hear we're doing worse than anywhere in Europe. I've had so much support from people on this road, but I choose where they go shopping. Donna is a vegetarian, so I ask someone else if I want a nice lamb steak. Selina gives me Sunday lunch. Today she asks, would you like a barbecue later? But it's Saturday, I replied. My brother, who's 84, keeps asking, why don't you sell the house and live down here? He lives down Walden, where I have a caravan. I asked him, how many people have knocked on your door? Not one, he replied. Selina told me, you'd be crazy to move. You've got Tesco's, Marks, a hospital around the corner, and a garden. Someone just needs to say it, really. Joyce, what I look forward to. Getting in my car and driving to my caravan in Walden. At the beginning of lockdown, a few people went on the site, but the police told them to leave. Should we talk about her object? It doesn't seem to have an object.
No, she didn't have an object, but
No.
you can talk about what she looked forward to.
Right, so
Oh no, about the VE
the
day.
VE Day. This road is amazing, but I'm disappointed there is no VE Day party today. It makes me quite sad. Perhaps we'll have a party when all this is over. So I guess that was actually done on VE Day, which would have been...
Did we have a party?
No, but it was this week VE Day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
She was desperate for a party. She kept buying the Union Jack flags and bunting and
Yeah.
didn't know.
She did have that actually in the window. There's a picture of that in the window. I think it was quite interesting. I thought it was interesting how prescient she was. You know, she saw that the government weren't buying goods from the people who were making them. They were doing it. You know, there was a certain level of corruption going on with their friends. But talk about your experience then, Selina.
Okay, do you want me to read this out? Or
Well, just read a bit of the front.
Okay. We've lived on the street together for 23 years. My husband Steve and myself. When we bought the house from Steve's mum, the biggest change for us during lockdown has been Steve working at home as an insurance broker via a laptop. At first it was strange, but he's got used to it and realises it may become the norm. Selina, who works as a regional manager for a network of dental practices, still goes to work every day, but no patients are being seen. Having to liaise with staff over who to furlough has been the most stressful.
So the long-term impact with Steve is what?
Well, the long-term impact is Steve now works from home pretty much full time, which, as my friends know. For me, that has been, I find it really difficult because I think you should
Yeah. Oh. So that's an ongoing battle which you're paying back on the house as a whole.
Yeah, of course, yeah, I think so. But,
And what about your children, your two children?
well, Fraser was at university, so we didn't see, although he was quite naughty, he did sneak back quite a lot. Kai's found it very hard at the beginning. He did get quite depressed. You know, he spent pretty much the whole time in his room. But in the end, he got used to it. But it impacted on his A levels and I guess his future. But yeah, he's good now. It was tough.
Yeah. So maybe we can go on to this next series of photos, because Louis, you feature in this with your family at the end, and you still got your skateboard that you had in the photograph 5 years before.
Yeah. It was a continuous hobby throughout in the period between both. And it was really good in lockdown because there was no one around. So you just go to central London and there was no one there. You could skate wherever you want.
You knew when Louis was coming down, black Louis out, black
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, I think you can see there's my little sister too. I think the first lockdown, this was after we came back, but we went to Cornwall for a bit because I grew up there when I was younger, and I think my mum sort of just had a feeling that there was some sort of safety there or something. So we went, and it was quite difficult. It was quite weird. It was already a time that was quite uncertain and quite strange. I had to finish school halfway through. I was the year that was supposed to do their A levels that year, so I didn't end up doing them. And I remember just saying bye to my friends, saying bye to my girlfriend at the time, thinking that I would see them again, and then going down to Cornwall and then not knowing whether I'd see them again at any point, which was quite weird. But plus I didn't have to do my A levels, so that was alright. And then the age difference between me and my sister, my mum timed it perfectly. I left school that year, my sister started that next year, and so it was a weird sort of thing of me getting used to not doing school anymore and her starting school, but it was all online, and so her reception and year one was, like a 4-year-old child. That's insane. So trying to work out friendships and teachers and stuff. But a friend of mine from school used to come and look after her, and they would do the lessons together. And credit to the school, they did a really good job of sort of trying to do the best that they could for these really little children. But yeah, so our lockdown experience was a lot to do with trying to manage her. We had a lot of routine. We do every Tuesday we'd have a pizza party, and Albert made tickets for everyone to come to the pizza party.
Albert's your younger sister.
Yeah, sorry, Albert's my sister. Yeah. To sort of create some sort of sense of normality, or feel like you're going out, or feel like you're able to do some sort of things that are quite normal.
Do tell the story of your mum, her panic buy, which you told us just before.
Yeah, so in the beginning period of when everyone was sort of panic buying, my mum, I don't think she was really that stressed, but I think she sort of in those initial stages, she was a bit like, oh, I think I should panic buy something. And she went to the shops and she came back with 2 cans of baked beans and a bottle of whiskey. I was like, that's not going to last long,
And you wanted to come back to London, didn't you?
Yeah, so the whole time we were in Cornwall, I wanted to come back to London. I just felt that it just felt really weird sort of leaving my life behind and sort of going back to this old life that I'd had. When I'd spent quite a lot of time building these new relationships, and it just felt quite strange. And I wanted to be close to all my friends and be with them. So we ended up coming back after the 6 weeks.
And Tom was recording birdsong, wasn't he?
Yeah, he got really into it. for his birthday the year before, I think he'd been given all this sound recording equipment. And he was doing, before he was doing like it was like a radio show, I think, where they'd go out and listen to nightingales and he'd show everyone there and record them. Then they do singing with them as well. And so that just kind of continued, and it was, you know, it was great for him. He just likes going out at 4:30 in the morning, finding the birds and recording them. But yeah, I think he really enjoyed it. He really loved it.
Is he still doing it?
Less so now. He still goes and looks at birds, but he does less of the recording.
But it was so quiet, wasn't it?
Mm.
You didn't have
Yeah.
any aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Tracks.
All right, and you could hear the birds in the street far more. couldn't you?
Mm.
Exactly.
Oh, and there's your family here as well, isn't it, in the street? And I love that, Sylvia, within the book where you say the experience of COVID was sad, happy, which I thought was lovely. So we get these little snippets of children.
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time during COVID at Hackney City Farm,
Yeah.
and suddenly our work was transformed. We were really important because there were people taking bags of fruit and vegetables every day. I mean, it sort of reached it with so many really reliable volunteers coming and distributing and working hard to get to lonely people in blocks of flats and distributing it. It feels, I haven't actually thought of it before today, but it was a massive job, and it worked really well. And I can't, it's a shame it was never documented. I don't think we ever counted, you know, the number of people, how many of them were older people living alone in flats, and it took a lot of work because often people wouldn't open the door, and all the drivers and deliverers. It developed a whole new practice, and then it suddenly evaporated.
Yeah,
It's just kind of sad.
Exactly. There's some more. Kate, who's here, enjoyed more time with the boys and the simple things of life. I think the boys enjoyed that too, did they?
I think so. I mean, I think similar to Laura, so Ed and I were still both working, but it just meant the weekends were really calm and quiet. So even though we were out a lot during the week, there was something about that, the four of you together in the garden. What are you going to do? So that's the dartboard and the guitar. And so that was quite a special time, even though they were both having quite a hard time, I think, around schooling, because our eldest son was doing his GCSE. So I think the schooling side of it was really tough, and the social side of it for them both was incredibly hard. But as a family, we had those moments in the weekends, so that was good.
Yeah. And also there was the netball in the street, wasn't
Yes, well, we had a basketball net
Yeah.
that we put up on one of the trees in the street.
there? Yeah.
And so we'd sort of take it in turns with other families, like Louis' family, Lawrence and Helen, and we'd have sort of do basketball where you'd have one family. So obviously we were trying to, you know, and then we were doing volleyball games, so you'd have one family on one side, one family on the other. But that was just, you know, that sort of moments of the day. So I think for the children that was incredible. Well, I don't know how you felt, but it felt incredibly important to be able to go and do some exercise and see each other. And do something together, but not together.
Great. And then this friends, the structure and rhythm to the week that school brings. So you were talking about that structure of the people as well. And then these were the paramedics in the street who were from us. They don't live there now, but they were a really important feature because the ambulance was coming down the street quite a lot, wasn't it? And they were missing going to Australia, obviously, and travelling to Europe. Oh, I'll just read about Elsie and then we can talk about Becca, of course. But Elsie had lived in the street for 88 years. And there's a very lovely, so I wanted to read about Elsie. I got to know my neighbours better at number 4. During lockdown, I hear Ben through the walls playing Coming coming round the mountain on his accordion. I love it. I used to sing it when I was working in the clothing factory, so I join in. I started as a button overlock at age 14 and continued to work for Jewish-owned factories until I was 26. Then I stayed home to look after my daughters. So going back to my club in Stoke Newington every day, Tuesday was what she missed, to meet friends and play games. But I'm not sure when it will stay open. So, and she's actually moved from the street. Rebecca, do you want to say anything about your...
Well, it was a tough time for everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think
Rebecca's
we were very lucky to live in a really great street, because we spent a lot of time on our doorsteps chatting and everything, you know, at distance.
At distance.
But I wasn't able to go into work, and I couldn't work from home because my job's really practical. So I found that quite difficult. So I had heaps of material, I still do. I decided to make masks. I mean, they probably were absolutely useless in terms of infection control, but it kept me busy. I made about 500, most gave them away.
And they look great though.
They were fun. They were all kind of like, yeah, all washed all the material before I made it all. I tried to make it as, you know, hygienic as possible. But I said, I don't think they would have been that infected. Really. But yeah, I mean, my partner then, he was working constantly from home, so that was quite difficult because he worked from the sitting room and the kitchen. So every time I wanted to go in there, I had to double check, because he had to do some quite, you know, work that was quite sensitive, and I wasn't allowed to be privy to those conversations, so that was quite hard. We had Louis, came in there, we did a lot of gardening, didn't we? And painting walls, which was great for me because it meant I could continue to do practical stuff. Gave Louis a few quid to, you know, not you couldn't spend it on anything really. You couldn't go out, but yeah.
That whole bubble thing was quite good. Oh no, they're in my bubble.
Yeah. Louis would come in the house and make him a cup of tea, go straight out the back garden. So we were kind of in constant fresh air. You literally would just go straight downstairs and you were out back or in the front garden. And I think Steve taught you a little bit of bricklaying and
Taught me all kinds of things.
yeah, all sorts of stuff.
It was really good.
Great. It was good fun. And yeah.
Yes,
And I made that bunting for Joyce in her window, which was out of the red, white and blue offcuts of the masks that I'd made.
Yeah.
But it was tough not seeing family, definitely. Absolutely. I had a grandson then, so...
I think one of the things that Natasha, who was your neighbour, who's
Oh,
not
yeah,
here,
great.
she said, well, one of the things she said, my plants have had more care during lockdown than my children have ever had.
Yes. But we actually took the fence down. Well, Lizzie lived next door to us now. We took the fence down. It was kind of on its way out anyway. And which meant we had an extended garden. We kept in our own garden, but we made this table that went over the fence, the wall, so we could actually eat together. But we were in each other's gardens. It was great.
Okay, and this was a lovely group of young people who had met at a Bulgarian music festival, and because they were really missing going out, they decided that for the photo shoot they would all dress up as if they were going to a festival. But this is there are several houses in the street which are for shared housing. They're only, 2-room shared housing for people who live for young people. Rented housing because of the cost of housing is so difficult. So there are, 30, 40-year-olds who are sharing housing in the street. This is Julia, who's been in the street as long as I have. And the whole thing about the gardens was very important for us because we've all had gardens. And also, do you want to think about Jenny and who were both sheltering?
10 Mehetabel Rd, Jenny and John. We've both been shielding and came out for the first time to be photographed on our front steps. Jenny, an artist, works from remembered walks in spaces she can no longer visit. She's also a keen gardener and has been overjoyed to find a milkman who delivers compost at 4 a.m.
Now she tells us.
That's moonlighting.
fit by fast walking the 29 stairs at home in sequences of 10 and by doing yoga online with Adrienne. John's been delighted to do even more cooking. He hopes this is a form of exercise, as he does the 29-step routine less often than Jenny. Neighbourly help and the strong sense of community have taken the sadness out of shielding. What we look forward to, Jenny, returning to my studio, visiting art galleries, participating in live exhibitions. John, experiencing live arts, walking in wildish nature, draft beer with friends.
Okay, great.
Because they really stayed.
They really stayed in.
I think the first time they came out, as it were, was the street party.
Well, it was to take the photo. Oh, but then beyond that was the street party.
And they just sat on the steps. Then I think they didn't venture down from the steps. So they really were quite isolated.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, pets were a big thing. More people got pets in the street. I mean, this is Sarah with her guinea pigs. Are they guinea pigs? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also there were lots of dogs, weren't there? How many more dogs were there?
What was that for?
Four.
4 or 5 new dogs, I think, appeared. Lockdown dogs on the street that weren't there before.
But they've all been cared for, haven't
Yes, so far.
they? They weren't runaways. Oh, and this
That's
was
something.
Eve. Those are your neighbours, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sam.
Yeah, Zach and his wife. Yeah, I mean, Easter, I don't know how they celebrated Eid, but I remember the people in the gardens behind us, I think they ran one of the gyms in Bethnal Green, and they'd taken all their gym equipment from Bethnal Green and brought it over, and so every day we could hear them working out, and then there was a bit of a break on Eid, because they did the call to prayer, and because they couldn't go to the mosque, there was quite a lot of people that sort of came round to this house at the back of ours, and then they all started bitching basically. But yeah.
These are my neighbours, Helen and John and Connor and Charlie. And similarly to Becca, we took down the fence, and in fact the fence is still down, which is brilliant. So we have this joint garden, which is lovely. And Helen was always making me soup, and because we have the shared garden space, so it was brilliant. She still makes me soup. And obviously they were, really keen to have an inclusive kind of society, which we could discuss later. And then there was also my family here, who was really incensed because she was staying at home, but she was still paying for her student accommodation, which was an issue. And Nicola was still the head teacher. Jeremy was writing at home. But they were glad to have my family at home, I think. Well, Sam, this person here, Sam, she said something very interesting that she couldn't, and I think that was the common thing, that she couldn't really listen to the news anymore because it was just too painful to listen to. You're in twice, Becca. There's me with a COVID, because I think I had COVID maybe at the beginning, so I'm holding one of those, what do they call oxymeters?
Oxygen.
And a recorder for taking people's histories who didn't write them down in the camp. Oh, and then I like some of the politics here. We despaired at grave mistakes made by the government. Oh, and there's Sarah, who was doing scrubs for local organisations. And this is would take his own advice. Also, I just wanted to read something about Raya. Tony's been working with students remotely, and Raya's been volunteering for the Hackney Migrant Centre's remote advice service. She's been frustrated by the government's response. Most homeless people, including asylum seekers with no recourse to public funds, have become eligible for housing, but it's still been a struggle to persuade local authorities to house them. Migrant parents too are fearful of sending their children back to school, as they live in crowded conditions and the virus would spread fast if we can. Particularly concerning is the plight of migrant detainees who aren't able to self-isolate. That's why Raya made the poster for the front window, evacuate detention centres, keep migrants safe. So I don't know if you remember that poster in the window. Oh, and this was Shabana, who was completely isolated on Marian Court, the estate at the end of Mehetabel Road that was being demolished, and she was the only family in this thing. Your mum was supporting her a bit, wasn't
My
she?
mum went to see her a lot. Yeah, the council were trying to move her out of her house, and it's just the housing they were offering her just wasn't open. So she, I think, quite bravely just refused to move. But yeah, it was really difficult for her. And, it was tough, and the fact that they haven't done anything with it is outrageous, really.
So we had a little demonstration, didn't we? Try and move. She has moved now to Woodbury Down, but it was a very tough time, and she had no garden, of course, like the rest of us. And the now voted whether the session will survive. And what did the session they offered beer during?
I think at some point they had beer that was going off.
So right at the beginning, you had to bring
Yeah.
a vessel, so we're all cleaning out our milk. If you could get hold of any milk, 2 litres, and going up there, So you had to drop your bottles off, leave, and then come back, and they'd be sort of waiting for you.
I think you took donations, didn't you, from the NHS?
Yeah. And then, after a little while, I think, again, they started to do it where you got more kegs in. So it's still during lockdown, but we were able to get draft beer.
I still do my takeaway pints at the church.
Yeah, but you had to do it at that point with a thing, yeah.
But I started that then, and
Can't get out of the habit.
the legacy is not there.
You can sit inside, Very welcome.
So that's the legacy of lockdown, yeah. Okay, well that's our last photo.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We've got a bit of time. It was a difficult time for lots of people. People lost loved ones, people got sick, people lost work. Generally, people were very anxious. But in what we've just heard, there's been lots of kind of really hopeful stories and actually quite positive experiences, I think, for many people during the pandemic. And the question really is about what we may, 5 years on, have lost. So some great things happening then. Do you think there are particular things that were positive then which we no longer have, we've sort of faded? I mean, it reminds me a bit of what Anne was saying earlier on about the kind of mutual support networks that formed immediately, really, in response to the pandemic.
Well, we still do doorstep wine.
But we did do that before. That's true. Yeah.
But we were quite lucky to be on a street that already had quite a good community. I mean, I remember when we moved to the street just over 20 years ago, and straight away it was like, oh, there's a residents association meeting, that would actually take place in person in John's house, and there were the street parties. So it already had a culture of community present that has sort of continued.
What do you mean in general, what we've lost from?
It comes through either way, really.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe locally, but more generally, it did seem like there was a kind of hopeful moment towards the end of the pandemic when we all thought, oh, society's going to be a bit different because of that experience. But is that still there?
I mean, I think that statement by John, we all hope out of pandemic we'll become to a fairer, more equal society. I mean, I don't feel that that's really going anywhere. And I think also that the whole thing about applauding, do you remember clapping the NHS workers and saying how important they were and all that? And then of course things have happened globally since then. I remember sort of thinking, oh, we've just got over the pandemic, and then, there was the war in Ukraine. So I kind of think that other things have kind of taken on. I mean, I think one of the lasting legacies is our whole thing online and working at home and those issues. I don't know how. I mean, I think we always had a quite strong community, but I think maybe it continued to be, or it was sustained. Maybe it brought more people in. I don't know.
I think some of it was about architecture and geography, because the types of streets with doorsteps and all that, where people felt relatively safe. But then there was the effort that one had to make to reach isolated people. And I know a lot of people were driving around with Meals on Wheels and stuff like that. That, I have no idea whether that has remained, you know, that. And there was a really big effort then to reach people who were isolated with food and stuff.
I think that whole thing about the architecture of our street actually really helped, particularly the layered steps, because you could by being at the bottom and I would still be distant by that. So I think that the architecture of and the geography of the street does help. It's not a run through. It used to be a run through, but it's not a run through.
I think the big thing we've lost is the calmness on our streets. And it used to be that you'd go out on your bike and everyone was kind to each other. And the streets now aren't like that anymore. There's a surging of cars. Some of the lower traffic networks that have come in and out quite often just ignored. School streets. And it feels still a little bit like a fight out there as a pedestrian or a cyclist. It'd be lovely to see a little bit of that courtesy and quiet as we move around the wider area.
I agree. I think it shows sort of memory is short, unfortunately. It was, I feel sort of quite naive in a way, that thinking that these things would continue and things get forgotten so quickly, and it's really sad, but that's maybe just how things are. You know, particularly like thinking about the E-Day recently and memories being short again, like referencing Joyce, that the importance of remembering the significance of these things, and it's all happening again. You can't rely on memory.
I think one of the other issues which was interesting when we were doing the research, and I was also with museums. I was interviewing the museums about what they'd been doing during COVID to remember it, and there was this debate about whether people really wanted to revisit it at that time. So some museums were doing it sort of immediately after, showing objects that were significant or histories, but others were saying, no, people don't want to look at this event. They will want to see about it like in 20 years or 50 years or whatever. So that whole issue of you almost stop remembering it for a protection of yourself, but then people revisit. So I think that's a kind of issue of memory, also whether you want to suppress the memory.
I just to add to Selena's points, I think it's really interesting about working from home, and so much to be celebrated about that. But there is maybe a bit of a loss of that, the separation of work and home.
Yeah, that's
And
why.
like,
So that is something to be lost.
Yeah,
Because I was at work the whole time,
Yeah.
and there wasn't even the only time I was off was right at the beginning when I had COVID, and then I was straight back in, and but yeah, it completely changed.
I've got colleagues at work that we've just been, I worked for 5 minutes, and I mean, I went straight back to work as soon as I could. In fact, me and my line manager went in, it was just the two of us. We did nothing related to our jobs. We were painting walls and just making the building look nice. Because it was something to do, desperate to get away from home. I still have colleagues who don't want to come into work. They only want to come in 1 day a week, and it's still that. And then my son, who had to work from home, was desperate to get back to work. And then when he went back to work, all his colleagues were still working from home, and he found that whole environment of being with colleagues or maybe going out for a drink on a Thursday or Friday completely gone. So he left his job and completely changed his career because he wanted to be in that environment of working with people, not sitting on his sofa, which he then closed his laptop and sat on the sofa again for the mad, yeah.
Pop on
are there other questions or reflections people want to make? Yeah, please.
This thing about forgetting is so important, isn't it? And I've been told about it, I haven't tracked it down yet. But I believe there's a whole book being written about people wanting to forget about health catastrophes. And the contrast that you made between how we remember the war. So, 80 years of VE Day, big deal, everybody's remembering it. But everybody wants to forget this, and perhaps it's because the scars are not as visible from a pandemic. They still see little ghosts of keep your distance things occasionally, but apart from that, it's mostly gone. Whereas war, there were things we're fighting, and we're still putting it together in the 1960s. And there isn't a kind of mythology of sacrifice and heroism and conflict and the other as the enemy. It's somehow tangled up with those things. So I just think that you doing this is a really good thing to do. I just think it's very important to remember all the things that happened. And I think just sort of broadening it away from your neighbourhood into Hackney, across London as a whole. The pandemic was so revealing of so many things. I think about going right from the way government works, the relationship between national governments, and you touched upon this with PB, stuff, and regional government and local government, and the flaws you saw in that. Huge dimensions of inequality that were revealed and brought to the fore in a way that we didn't think about quite so much as we used to, I think. And just a couple of anecdotes of my own that have been sort of inspired by things. The thing about exams, you sounded quite pleased not to have to take taking it. Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting because I was reading something the other day about, to me that seems very sensible, you know, but there's another group of people from your age group who, and I've got a daughter who's just literally become 23, didn't sit her A-levels and feels a bit, yeah, you know, I've done all this work and didn't get to do it. And working from home is just one more story than standard. So working from home, I had because I've worked from home for decades. And suddenly the house was full of all these other people. After one, we'd go down to the kitchen making a tea, got to chat. Please, no. But one of my other daughters was a primary school teacher and started teaching remotely. And she set up her little virtual classroom in the room directly beneath where I work at home. And every morning at 9 o'clock, her voice would come up through the floorboards, and she was doing her phonics class with her reception, you know, so going through all the, and I'd found myself sitting up much more than I had been before. So there is, I think it's just really important that these happy things told in history in lots of different ways.
I think that was there was a thing about the whole who had laptops and who didn't. You know, that whole thing about inequality of, I mean, there was certainly somebody in the street who didn't have a laptop from school for a long time, neighbour, and had really difficulty with the software. And you were talking about the difficulty of teaching online with ESOL students.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think Helen and my children said they could hear me in the morning saying, "No, Ahmed, turn your microphone on. And I remember once I was teaching Somali, I teach English language, I was teaching this Somali guy, and he had a child crawling across his head while I was teaching him. And I think he had 11 children or something, and he had one child in the same room in a primary school lesson, another child in a secondary school lesson in the same room, and then him trying to do a lesson. Poor guy who's doing his best, you know, in the same room. It was just bonkers.
Yeah. That's the other thing. I mean, I Zoom now with my family in Canada, which I never did before, and that's something that's continued.